So, it was February 1993, 22 years ago, and instead of being with my wife, my lovely wife and bride of 6 months, I was in a car with a buddy packed full of climbing gear and headed to Banff, Canada for a weekend of ice climbing. We both had experienced some recent successes in big mountains, and you could say that we were on a focused mission. We were trying to climb as much as we could and as often as we could in preparation for whatever next peak was coming. When we arrived in Banff that weekend, we were informed that an Arctic front had entered the region. And anybody who's familiar with the properties of ice, you probably know that very cold temperatures and ice don't mix. The ice becomes brittle, it dinnerplates, it doesn't take protection very well. So without a lot of forethought, not a lot of planning, we decided to change our agenda on the spur of the moment. We had a quick conversation, and the idea came up, hey, let's just go do the north face of Athabasca in a day. Here's a picture of the north face of Athabasca. The green line represents the ascent we would take. The red line represents the descent. So we were thinking about doing from the car a one-day ascent, descent in the middle of winter during an Arctic cold snap. That's why I'm here. Under most conditions, the north face of Athabasca is a moderately difficult climb. It's just that we happened to go on a day when all the variables were working against us. So on the morning of February 13th, we left the Rampart Hostel very early and began the approach, and just before sunrise, we roped up and began the climb. By about mid-morning, we were only a third of the way up the route. I had noticed during the morning that as a climbing pair, we weren't doing really well in terms of finding a rhythm. And for two climbers trying to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time, rhythm is essential. We were making small mistakes, we were dropping gear, we weren't having a good day. So mid-morning came, and it was about 11 o'clock. Temperatures are plummeting, bear in mind, because this is an Arctic cold front, so the temperatures were never above zero that day. They hovered between 20 and 30 below zero. We had a decision to make, a crucial decision: continue up the climb or get off while we could. And it would have meant sacrificing some gear, but that wouldn't have been a big deal. We decided to keep going. We thought that it would be faster to get up and off than to try and descend and lose some of this gear that we were going to be leaving behind. To our credit, by about dusk, we were within one pitch of ice of the crux of this route, and the crux of this route is mixed climbing. It includes ice and rock, so you're climbing rock with crampons on and tools. But we did not have enough daylight to finish the climb, so a deal was struck. I would do the final pitch of ice in the evening light, the dusk, if he would do the final pitch of rock in the morning. He was much younger. I was 33 at the time. He was 19. I figured he could do that better than me in the morning. I'm very pleased that it turned out that way. I got the better end of the bargain. So I went ahead and did the final pitch of ice. I was sweating. I was cold. It was well below zero. I made my way to the bottom arrow on the slide. It was about a 1 foot by 4 foot ledge. There was just enough room for us to sit or stand, nothing else. We hugged a lot, we stomped our feet, and we just counted the hours as the hours slipped on through the night. Earlier that day, our food and water had frozen, so I would say probably by about 11 or 12 on the day of the actual climb, we were without food and water from that point on. I would say that we were both starting to slip into early stages of hypothermia, and because I experienced frostbite before, I was in the early stages of showing frostbite on my hands and my face. Morning finally came, but boy, I tell you, it took a long time to come. And when it finally did, my partner, who to this day, what an amazing young man, he gathered himself, prepared, and went ahead and pulled off this final pitch of rock and ice after so many hours of discomfort, and with both of us being in a hyperthermic stage at that point. On the morning of February 14th, we summited the There wasn't a lot of celebration. We knew we needed to get off the route, and we needed to get off the route quickly. We also knew that there was a storm front coming. We could see it blowing in, and we knew that our time was limited. As we began the descent, little things were happening again, right? So we didn't find the rhythm the day before. We weren't finding the rhythm on the descent. Compound that with being hypothermic, not having a clear state of mind, thirsty, hungry. I was frostbit. Some slips occurred. We stopped. We talked. Hey, let's get our act together here. This could lead to disaster. We both agreed with that. Continued on down the route, and then disaster struck. My partner caught a crampon right at the top of the ice fall that's indicated by the upper arrow. He started descending rapidly, and I made one wild attempt at what's called a team arrest. I was able to get an ice axe in briefly into the ice. As soon as the rope came under tension, however, I was pulled off and spun backward, head over heels. There was a point at which I was falling through a cloud, and I remembered thinking to myself, what was I thinking? What the hell was going through my mind when I made this series of decisions to put myself in this place? It's that moment when something's gone really bad and there's no turning back. During the fall, I struck a ledge with my right knee. We figure we fell several hundred feet. The fall on my right knee, in turn, broke my pelvis and my hip and my back and all the ribs on my right side. My partner, because he had caught a crampon, had a severely broken right leg. We came to rest on the lower bench that's indicated by the lower arrow. And I don't know how this happened, but I had the wherewithal to stand up, walk over to him, look at him. I assessed that he was pretty beaten up. I knew I was pretty beaten up, and we really didn't have many options. So we both dressed in as much clothes as we had. We crawled into bivouac sacks. We were hoping for the best. I think both of us were pretty sure at that point that these were our last few hours on this earth. Meanwhile, and this is a point of the story I haven't raised yet, we had a third friend who was involved in the trip that weekend who had decided not to come. A very, very experienced mountaineer and a local physician. For some reason, at the spur of the moment, he decided to get in his car on Friday night, and he drove to Banff anyway. He arrived in Banff to discover that we had left Banff because of the ice conditions and that we had moved up to the Rampart Hostel. He went immediately to the Rampart Hostel and interviewed the manager there. The manager said, yes, indeed, the boys had decided to go and do this one-day ascent. Our friend got in his car, drove to the pass where our car was parked. He started waving people down. Nobody had seen us. The day passed, evening came. He spent the night in his truck at the pass, hoping that we would come out at some point that night, and we never did. In the morning, he knew enough about the mountains and weather, and he knew enough about us and what kind of gear we had that he had an intuitive sense something wasn't right. So we got in the car and immediately drove down to Parks Canada, had a conversation with the rangers down there. He was trying to get them to initiate a helicopter search. They weren't comfortable with that with the oncoming storm, so there was a conversation. He felt like he had one best guess where we might be, and they finally bought in and said, okay, we'll get a helicopter up in the air, but the window's about 20 minutes. Now, bear in mind, this is going on while we're descending, so we haven't even fallen yet, okay? We haven't even fallen yet. They fly up to the pass, and we have only been on the ground now about 20 minutes. So we're in our sacks, we're getting ready for whatever's going to happen, and it's only been 20 minutes, and I can hear a helicopter off in the distance. I've worked around helicopters all my career. I didn't say anything to my partner, but I was pretty sure that was what was going on. The sound got closer and closer, and they came up from the bottom of the mountain, so I remember very clearly it was one of those images of the helicopter rotor blades, and I'm looking through the windshield right into the face of the helicopter pilot. Yay, yay. I'm gonna make it, So yes, we were both evacuated out and off of Mount Athabasca, but it wasn't a comfortable ride. It was a small helicopter. and they decided that we should be sling loaded, which means that we were placed in Stokes litters and flown underneath the belly of the helicopter to Banff. So think about this. I was already hypothermic, I was already frostbitten, and now I was looking at a 15-minute ride underneath the belly of a helicopter, right? It was an excruciating ride. 12 days later, we're back in Spokane. We're both very thankful to be alive, incredibly thankful, and incredibly thankful for the efforts of our friend who, in his diligent efforts, made sure that he could do everything he could to make sure that we survived this incident. And to this day, whenever I have the chance, I thank him. So what's the point? Where am I going with this? On the heels of the incident, once the dust had settled a little bit, we were starting to hear words like reckless, inexperienced, probably didn't make some good decisions. And I was angry, but the anger really was a disguise for my embarrassment, because remember, I too was a professional climbing ranger. That was my job. I was also an Air Force pararescueman. I had years of being on the other end of this scenario, of helping people. Now all of a sudden, I was that guy. I'm the one being rescued. It didn't sit well with me. It didn't sit well. And I continued to climb, by the way. I still was on that mission. But over time, I sat down and I reflected. And I reflected honestly. There's a local educator who once said to me, and I still value this, I think about it all the time, we must untangle internal experience from external circumstance and recognize that we are creators of the former and never victims of the latter. What that meant to me is that I had created an internal experience to rationalize why this accident had happened. And I needed to come to grips with it. It was time for me to say, we made some poor choices, we need to hold ourselves accountable, and we need to be responsible for this. Part of it, and pretty handsome dude, eh? That's what you call severe thermal injury on the end of my nose. It was the second time I had done that. I had done it on Mount McKinley once a few years prior, and then this was the second time. I cannot do that again because my nose will go away the next time. But I recognized that I was engaging in behaviors such as being emotional, being defensive, being quick to judge, and in order for me to learn and move on and grow from this incident, I had to let go of those things. And so eventually I did, and I held myself accountable, and there were several things that came into perspective for me. One, and many of us do this, I think, is that we sometimes live our lives in hyperspeed. It's always the next peak event, the next accomplishment. We're in this race to get where we're going. It forced me to slow down and recognize, we hear this all the time, but it forced me to slow down and recognize that living in the moment actually is important. It's a really big deal. We only get one go-round at this. And every day that I spend with my family, my wife, my daughters, my friends, the young people I work with at the university, those are special moments. But if we're always on the run and we're always in a hurry, we take those things for granted. We tend to just move right through them. And so I rethought this notion of peak events. The other thing that I recognized is that I needed to enjoy the process more. Who I am on a daily basis, the people I interact with, the people I affect, the training moments, moving outside, that really defines who I am. It's not these one-time peak events. People are going to remember me for how I treat people and what a good guy I was and what a good educator I was. So the process came into clear focus for me. The other thing that happened as a result of this is this rearranged, I was 33 at the time, this rearranged my notion of risk tolerance and what is acceptable risk. And I'll come back to this point at the very end. As an educator and as somebody who works with young people in the outdoors, I make it a mission to help young people also reassess their tolerance for risk and what really matters. So many of you would think this would be a great ending point for my story, and it ought to be, but I'm not done yet. I'm going to fast forward you 16 years, many river miles later, many mountains later, many experiences in the outdoors later. I'm with a small group of friends in the St. Joe River drainage on a creek called Marble Creek, which is a class 3-4 run, very fun run, not a big deal, just a day out on the river with buddies. However, on this particular day, the creek was at peak flow, the peak flow of the season, and that was something we were not aware of. The river, or the creek, looked a little bit high, but we weren't totally certain how big it was. We put on. We started the run, and it happened that one of the people in the group, one of my very good friends, was having a bad day. He was making small mistakes, he was having equipment malfunctions, and myself and others who were in the group, who've been around a long time now, we were in alert mode. We've come to know that small linked events, small little things that we would normally not pay attention to, are important to pay attention to because they can lead to big events and sometimes tragic events. We took off and had a conversation and asked everybody in the group, is everybody good? Does anybody want to walk right now? I'm the first person usually in the group to say, if you feel like walking, I'll walk. I'm all about that because we'll live to paddle another day. We didn't. We didn't. So, because it was at peak flow, the nature of some of the rapids had changed. There was at least one Class 5 in there. Tight canyon, torrential, nonstop, catch eddies where we can, and it's that mindset of, and some of you may recognize this, even though you're with the group, it's every man for himself at that point. There was an incident, somebody came out of a boat, the front end of the group was concerned with getting that person to shore along with his gear. That split the group up. So now all of a sudden we had two groups on the water with not within visual sight or communication anymore. Because we were toward the end of the run and the water was moving so quickly, those of us in the front just did what we needed to do and we were at the takeout before we knew it. It wasn't until an hour or two later that we recognized that we had lost somebody that day. I had lost a very, very good friend. So my point today is that sometimes we're tempted to take these events, and it doesn't have to be outdoor recreation, I'm just using this as an example. We have these events that happen in our lives and we're tempted to sweep them under the carpet and keep going. And that's because generally most of us are overscheduled, overstimulated, and we're just on the run. I would tell all of you that when you have these peak events, take advantage of them. They have some powerful learning outcomes. There can be a lot that comes from these, whatever it is that's happening in your life, but the temptation is to sweep it away. I think this notion of reflection, process, learn, move forward is really important. But the temptation is to block it and go. The last thing I'm going to end with, this important message for all of us. Now, bear in mind, I'm a recreation guy. It's my preoccupation, it's my occupation, it's what I do every day, whether it's in the classroom or out on my own. It is so important to me. Not as important as my family and my friends, but it is really, really important to me. I want you all to understand clearly from where I sit now, there is no recreation pursuit or adventure activity that is worth dying for. Not a single one. And I'll hear people say now, oh, he died doing what he loved, or she died doing what she loved. Or I'll hear a young person say, I'm willing to put it all on the line. That's crazy. It's BS. It's BS. This life is precious. We get one shot at it. Recreation is just one aspect of many for us to enjoy and explore. And all I can say is keep it in perspective. It's not worth dying for. Thank you.